Welcome to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. It's the show geared toward keeping you up to speed with the latest auto news, event coverage, and expert industry insight. Now, here are your hosts, Matt Avery and John Kraman.
Yes, welcome to another On the Move. And John, man, today we have a very Mopar-centric show. I'm very excited to get into it. Coming up in segment 2, I have an extended interview with Gregory Qualls. Now, he is the consignor of a very special vehicle that is going to be crossing the block at the upcoming Indy auction. He is the owner of the 1970 Dodge Challenger known as the Black Ghost. Now, John, that name is probably going to be familiar for a lot of listeners because that car really does have a bit of mystique and allure out in the hobby, part because of the way it was used by its original owner. Gregory's father, Godfrey, bought that car brand new in downtown Detroit. He was a law enforcement, he was a military veteran, and he had a habit of street racing, which is where the name came from. And I know as part of our conversation about the car, John, you are really dialed into not just the story, but the hardware. Let's break down exactly what that Challenger is equipped with.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Matt, because really, a lot of times it's about the story or it's about the car. In this particular case, we've got both. The car itself, one of one. It's a 1970 Challenger, and Godfrey went and he basically checked off all the boxes you could find, with the exception of the optional sunroof. He got great colors. We'll call it triple black because it's black on the outside and on the inside, and the vinyl top is that really rare and unique gator grain. But what really gets me excited is a combination of the power plant, the legendary 426 Hemi. It's a 4-speed with the track pack. That's cool in itself, but he ordered some comfort items as well, rarely if ever seen on a Hemi Challenger, such as, a couple of examples, power windows and an AM/FM stereo radio, very heady stuff for that time period. So that, I think, and combined with the story and just the condition and the one family-owned since new of this car, is going to make it a main attraction for the upcoming Indy auction in May.
Yeah, and it really just pushes it over the edge, John. And speaking of the car and its story, it's going to have a very busy spring.
Right.
And tell us about, you're kicking off kind of the storytelling of the Black Ghost with a TV taping. Fill us in, what are some of the details of what's planned?
Yeah, this is really cool. Never have done this before. Done a lot of promotional videos on high-profile entries in the past, but never a full-blown TV show. A 30-minute special on the Black Ghost. I head out on the week of January 30th. We've got Chris Jacobs will be hosting it and some other special guests yet to be announced, really digging deep into the story about the Black Ghost, the importance of it, and man, it's going to be really great. Already really excited about being a very small part of a very, very big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from there, John, man, the Black Ghost does not sit quiet for long.
No.
It's going to have a tour. I'm calling it a Black Ghost Spring Tour.
Love it.
Where it's going to be kicking off in downtown Detroit. Man, what a fitting location, John, for that car to have been built in Detroit, sold in Detroit, and used and enjoyed in Detroit. And now it's returning there for the 70th Annual Autorama held at Huntington Place, the Cobo Hall Convention Center in downtown. It's going to be on display. And on top of that, John, there's going to be some other events that we're going to be able to announce as we get a little bit closer to the big unveil or the big event at Mecum's Indy auction.
Yeah, and we understand that the car not only is it going to be on a tour attending some high-profile shows like you mentioned, but it's also going to be at a couple of the Mecum auctions coming up in the future. More about that as we learn more.
Absolutely.
Still a bit early yet, but a lot of moving parts to this. Going to be a major, serious promotion. Maybe one of the biggest in Mecum history.
Could be. All right, John, so let's talk about some of the other travels that we have. And I know something that we're equally excited about is taking place in early March. You and I are getting the chance for the very first time to go see our friends at the Radford Racing School.
Right, on March 8th, Matt, you and I are going to be going out to the Phoenix area, Chandler, Arizona specifically, for a visit to the Radford Racing School, which has recently entered into a really cool relationship with Mecum Auctions. So, you and I are going to be out there getting a tour of the facility, hanging out with the people. Don't know if we're going to get any track time yet or not, but I'm really looking forward to it. Just like you are, high-performance driving is a huge part of high-performance cars. So it will give us a great orientation on exactly what they're doing out there, what the different programs are, and we will be able to report on that as well.
And then another stop that we have in March, John, and again, it's Mopar focused. We are going to be attending the Dodge Last Call special event held on March 20th at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Now, what Dodge is trying to do is they're trying to pack a lot into this event. It's going to be a horsepower party to end all parties, I think. They are going to have celebrity guests. They're going to have some racing there on the track. And then, of course, what you and I are dialed into is they're going to have some announcements about the future of their product portfolio. And on top of that, in addition, they're going to be celebrating the Last Call editions, which you and I have been dialed in since they were unveiled at last year's SEMA show. So to date, 6 have been unveiled. We have a Challenger Shakedown. We have the Challenger Black Ghost, which is noteworthy. That is one of the special editions that pays homage to the 1970 that belongs to the Qualls. What a great tie-in there.
Well chosen Dodge.
Well chosen Dodge. And on top of that, if that sounds familiar or looks familiar, we were very excited at the Kissimmee auction. We had one of the very first 2023 Challenger Black Ghost Last Call editions on display with the original. I don't know if it could get any better than that.
They were so cool together. You could definitely feel those two talking to each other.
Absolutely.
Right on.
And then, let's see, what are some of the other Last Call editions? We have King Daytona.
Yep. We have a Super Bee on the Charger platform, and then we also have a couple of really cool versions, swinger versions of both the Charger and the Challenger. And so there's 6 currently announced Last Call editions, 1 more yet to be announced. We'll learn about that on Monday, March 20th, and the podcast immediately following that, we will make that announcement. Now, let me just add a little bit of a tidbit, Matt, to this whole thing with the reveal of the very Last Call edition. I am especially tuned into and geared into paying a lot of attention to what Dodge is saying either upfront or in between the lines in regard to the future of the Challenger and the Charger platform. Now, we know that they're going to be continuing to promote their full EV, which is really cool. We've seen that, and that has been revealed for quite a while now. But I just wonder, as we go forward, exactly what is going to be a full line future. Whether or not we're going to find anything out at the Last Call reveal, don't know. But we're going to be paying heavy attention to it, and obviously, as always, we're going to keep everybody posted.
Right on. All right, John, well, as we wrap up this segment, let's transition and keep the theme on performance, but switch over to Chevrolet performance. We've got to talk about some Corvette news. I know everyone was caught off guard, I think even you, with what we've learned about the E-Ray. Fill us in. What's the details on that model?
Yeah, Matt, coming off of, obviously, we've talked about just how strong Kissimmee was this year. Corvette's just at record prices as well. And I think that the C8, which has been out now since 2020, has done a lot to just put more emphasis on Corvettes of all generations. But obviously, the recent announcement and starting to get a lot more details on what's referred to as the E-Ray. Now, I have to tell you, I was taken a bit by surprise because I thought they were going to save that name for a full EV Corvette sometime in the future. Nothing's been revealed or announced yet, but I presume that will happen. I really thought that this hybrid, and more about that in a moment, was going to be called Grand Sport, following the Corvette tradition. But nope, they didn't do it. They called it the E-Ray. Here's what it is. It's a standard engine, 495 horsepower, traditional pushrod V8, not the Z06 engine, 495 horsepower, with an additional 160 horsepower supplied by electric motors in the front. This is not a plug-in hybrid, and this was not done for fuel economy. It was done for performance. It's the fastest accelerating Corvette in history, and it's also the first all-wheel drive Corvette. How about a 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds? Base price in the $110,000 range. And you're right, I think it took the world by surprise. It slightly outperforms the Z06, but it's doing it with electric technology. Don't think it's going to take anything away from the Z06. Moving forward, we've got more Corvette news that will be announced, and that'll be a turbocharged version of the Z06, presumably called ZR1, and then maybe that ZR1, I'll predict in the 850 horsepower range. Add the electric motors onto that. We could very well see in the next year or two the announcement of a 1,000 horsepower sort of slanged or codename Zora. Whether or not that's a production name, who knows? But here's what we do know. The future of the C8 Corvette is very vibrant, and being a fan, we both are, we're going to stay right on top of it.
Mecum Auctions is proud to bring you On the Move with Matt Avery and John Kraman. For more on the world of collector cars, head over to Mecum.com. Now let's get back to the show.
If you're into Mopar history, this is going to be one very special interview as I'm chatting with Gregory Qualls, the current caretaker of his family's 1970 Dodge Challenger RTSE, known as the Black Ghost, a car that his father bought brand new, and the news has just been made that it is headed to Dana Mecum's 36th annual Spring Classic auction this May in Indianapolis. Gregory, there is so much to get into with you about this car and the memories attached to it. I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matt.
All right, so let's start at the very beginning. Take me back to when your dad ordered the car.
So in 1969, October, my dad ordered the Challenger, 1970 Challenger RTSE with the Hemi, 4-speed, 410 rear axle. And it was supposed to come with black vinyl top, but when he received the car, it came with the gator grain. And so he loved the car, but he didn't really like the top, but he accepted the car anyway.
And part of your dad's legacy is prior to his ordering the car, he served as in the U.S. or the Army's 82nd Airborne. So he gets out of the military and then he starts a new career in law enforcement. Pretty ironic that he goes out and orders one of the baddest, muscle machines out there. Did from your relationship with your dad, did he ever talk about where did the desire for this type of car come from?
Well, my dad didn't really talk about that too much with me, but I think the desire came from because, my dad he's being a paratrooper, so he's jumping out of airplanes. I think that's what he loved to do, and that's one of the things he always talked about. He says jumping for him was an addiction. He loved jumping, and that's how he was, and that's who he was.
A big part of this story is your family and your dad's connection to Detroit. Is that where he was born and raised?
Yeah, no, my dad was born and raised he was born in Nashville, Tennessee. Then the family moved up to Detroit. His dad worked at Dodge Truck. And it's for the jobs, for the automotive jobs at that time. So, yeah, he's basically lived mostly in Detroit for most of his life.
So the vehicle is ordered in fall of 69.
Yes, October 69 is when the car was ordered.
And then he receives it early December of that year.
Yes.
And part of the mystique of the car is how your dad used it, particularly when the sun went down. Detail where he could be found late and most late nights cruising Detroit.
Yeah, so my dad really wanted to enjoy his car. He bought a brand new Hemi Challenger. And he wanted to really enjoy the car. So at night, he'd go out and go race. So he raced on Telegraph, Woodward, Stucker, Airport Road, all those places, French Road. He was all over the place. And he would show up. People wouldn't know who he really was. And he'd race you. And then he just kept going. He kept going. He'd disappear because he couldn't let nobody know his secret.
And so that's where the name Black Ghost came from, right? That's what the car was known as then and still today.
Yes. So the Detroit street racing crowd named it the Black Ghost because of the black car. And that's what he did. He ghosted you.
Now, so those were the early years of, in the early 1970s. Right around 1975, is that when he parked it and kind of took it off the streets for good?
Yeah, so he took it off the streets for good in around 77, 78.
Okay.
I don't know the exact date, but it's around during that time. Because by 79, the car was in the garage and covered up on jack stands.
Any reasoning for why that happened?
Yeah, family. My dad was a family man, and he loved his family, and he'd do anything for his family. And his family was more important at that time. And then also, too, he went back into the military in 77. So he went back, he did his Special Forces training and went to school, went back to training, and got his Green Beret. And that's when he served the 12th Group.
As you think back, what are some of your earliest memories and recollections about the car?
When I was a little boy, I think it was around 79, 80 when it was in the garage. He took me out just for one little quick ride, and we was in the car. I was a little kid then, and he puts a $100 bill on the dash, and he says, "Okay, when I say go, if you can grab that $100 bill off the dash, it's yours." sad to say that I never did get that $100 bill.
Now, when you think to the other vehicles that your dad owned, was there anything else in his possession that came close to this in terms of performance or uniqueness?
Yeah, this was the car. This was his prize car. I mean, we had I believe it was a 73 or 74 Charger as a family car. But the Ghost stayed in the garage during 77 to 79. That's when it went in. And it stayed there for 37 years.
So before we pick up that story, Gregory, let's talk a little bit about how the car is equipped. So like you mentioned, your dad ordered it with the top of the line, the 426,
yes,
the Hemi, most powerful engine that Dodge offered that year, 425 horsepower, 490 pound-feet of torque. Now, your dad also optioned it with the special edition package. What did that bring?
So the special edition package had the overhead consulate and the smaller rear window limo, they call it, the limo window in the back, and it gives it other trim options around the car in the front, lower valence.
And one of the bespoke touches that Dodge did not install, but your dad did, is a trailer hitch.
Yes.
What's the story with that?
Well, my dad was always into speed, and just as much as he loved cars, he loved bikes. So he's into motorcycles. So he had a 69 Norton Fastback and a 68 NC Matchless Norton as well. And he loved bikes. He had a bunch of bikes. He had between BSAs and Triumphs, and because I talked to my uncles and stuff, and he always had bikes, and he's always was on bikes. And he'd pop a wheelie and go down half the block down, popping a wheelie. And that's how my dad was. He was just an energetic guy, and then he loved speed, and he loved adventure.
Now, before he put it in long-term storage, when he was using it, did he allow anyone else in the family to drive the car?
Yes, my mother. So, yeah, my mom drove the car. And what he would do is he would disengage the linkage to one of the four barrels, because, it has dual four barrels.
Right.
So she couldn't get all the way into the speed of the car, the power of the car.
So picking up the story, Gregory, you mentioned that the car is stored for about, you said 37 years, roughly?
Yeah, around 30, roughly,
Okay.
between, 35 plus.
That brings us up to 2014. You get a call from your dad. He invites you over, and you guys spend an afternoon out in the garage. Fill me in. What all happened?
So my dad told me, he said, "Hey, son, are you doing anything?" I said, "No, not really." So he said, "Why don't you come over and have a beer with me?" So I went over to the house to visit my dad. We sat in the kitchen. We had some beers. And then he says, let's go out to the garage. So I was like, all right, the garage. Okay. So we walked out to the garage. And then in the garage, he was looking at the car. And then he started taking the covers off the car. And I think that's when he was trying to tell me that he was sick. But he really couldn't tell me that, because my dad was a very humble guy. And he kept his life very private. So he didn't want it, to anybody to feel burden over him. So I think that's one of the reasons why he never really told me. But we had a good time. We took the covers off the car. We cleaned off the car because the car was really dusty from the horse blankets and all the dust settling in on the car. And we just kind of looked at the car. And then that's when I realized the car was like, wow, this must be a special car. But I just didn't know how special it was at that time.
How would you rate your overall interests in performance and classic cars? Were you heavily into them, or were they really not on your radar?
Yes, as far as real cars, no. At that time, I wasn't really into cars. I really didn't even really like working on them. I was more into the RC racing them. I was more into that. But I guess at heart, and true heart, I was a car guy, but just in a different type of thing, right? And then as I start working on the car, and going over it, since I was working on the car and going over it, it made me appreciate the car and realize, like, wow, like, this is really cool. And that's when I start getting more involved into cars. And I start researching the car, studying it, finding out what was so special about it.
So that kind of afternoon sparked something inside of you. And then the next kind of milestone in the car's history is roughly about 2 years later in 2016. What happened then?
So after my dad passed in 2016, I wanted to really see why did my dad keep this car. What was so special about it? 'Cause, you know, most people just sell their old cars. You know, why did it sit in the garage for so long? And so as we just start working on it, you know, and I started doing research on the car. And then that's when, a year after that, after I got the car running, because I wanted to make sure I get the car running safe, because I wanted to drive the car to enjoy it. That was the whole premise. I wanted to enjoy my dad's car. I really wanted to drive it and have fun, see what my dad, how he felt about this car, and why was it so important to him.
Something worth noting for our listeners is that in December of 2015, your dad signs over ownership of the car to you, right?
So on December 21st, 2015 is when he signed the title over to me.
So, and I believe it's within a matter of days your dad had passed.
Yes.
After that.
So my dad passed on Christmas Eve.
And then as you moved into the new year, 2016, like you said, your interest was kind of fueled to learn more. And then from there, you really hit the ground running, both in learning about this particular car, but then also getting the story out. What types of activities and shows did you start attending?
So, yeah, so a year after I got the car running, you know, from 2016. So in 2017, I had a friend of my dad's that introduced me to Bob Ashton for the Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals, and this is how this all started. And he told me, he said, "Yeah, just, you know, you got to bring the car to the show." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, Bob. You know, this car's it's kind of dinged up and it's rough, and you know, I'm just enjoying it and you know, just driving it." And he says, "No, trust me. You really need to bring the car. Don't worry about it, and just come bring the car." So that's what I did. So I took the car to the show, and sure enough, he was right. Everybody was amazed about the car. They saw the car for the first time, and people that thought that the car was a unicorn, it didn't exist. Now that's the car that was actually real.
And then from there, where was your next stop or stops?
Then from there, I said, you know what? Wow. Since I did so good and so many people were telling me about my dad and stuff, let me take it to home. So I decided to do the Autorama in 2018. So when we went to the Autorama, that's when the Detroit crowd keened in on the car, and that's when I heard all the stories, like everything. Just people were coming up to me and says, "Yeah, I remember this car, your dad, this and that." And we even had Mancini from Mancini Racing. He told me that my dad used to go to the Conant shop when it was in Conant, off of Davison and Conant in Detroit, and he used to, you know, because my dad used to patrol the area. So he worked in the 11th precinct over in that area, so that would have been Davison. And he would go over there to the shop and go talk to them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I learned
Very
a
cool.
lot of things from Detroit that I didn't know. And I'm like, what? My dad did this and he did that. And I was like pretty amazed, because that's a part of the story I never heard of my dad, you know. And then I found out later that some of my family members knew. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me? What? So, yeah, that's how that went.
So then from the Motor City, I know another stop that you made was the National Mall in Washington, D.C. How in the world did that come about?
So that came about. So after the Autorama, I had met up with Ed from Carlisle Chrysler Nationals. And he invited me to come out to Carlisle in 2018, in July. So then I went out there, and he got me a good spot in the main building there, and we put the car on display there, and people loved it. They just loved it. And it just so happened that the Historical Vehicle Association, or known now as the Haggerty's Drivers Foundation, they were looking at the car at that show, and they saw the car, and then they saw they read my banner with the story on the car, and they were amazed. And when I entered the car, any show I go to, I never do any judgment. This is not for me. This is for my dad. I don't want any trophies. This is not the point. The point is for me to tell my dad's story and to share the love. And they gave me a trophy. They said, "We have to give it to you. We have to give it to you." McCacken gave me a trophy. "We got to give it to you." This is people telling me, "I got to give it to you." And so when in Carlisle, I ended up winning the National Heritage Award. And that's a big award for Carlisle that year. And then fast forward 2 years later, the Haggerty called me back, the Haggerty Drivers Foundation called me back and said, "We would like to induct your car into Library of Congress."
So from Michigan to Chicago to Pennsylvania to the National Mall, any other stops on this whirlwind tour of showcasing your dad's car and his story?
Oh yeah. So after all that happened, then it was concourse time.
Okay.
Concourse de America. So we did one in Michigan, hometown. Then we did one in Hilton Head. And then we did the last one at Amelia Island.
Okay. What were those experiences like for you?
Those were awesome experiences, especially for a muscle car. Those type of shows that, you don't really have muscle cars there.
Right.
There's like Duesenbergs and, really high-class cars, Packers, and cars of that stature. But people there loved the car. That was kind of amazing to me. It was like, wow, these people saw the car and they were following up the story, and they really enjoyed it. They really enjoyed the car and the story.
And clearly someone else who enjoys the car and the story is Dodge, who has selected to include it as one of the last call special editions that's releasing later this year. It's an incredible opportunity. How did this come about?
I'm glad that Dodge acknowledged the car, because of the story and the car and what it is. That's basically how it happened.
When did you first hear that this was even taking place?
It was mentioned to me. It was kind of like a mention.
By the way, we're building 300
well,
vehicles.
Mark, before you even start building it, this was like during the concourse in Plymouth. And I had Ralph came up to me, and he says, "Yeah, I really love your dad's car, and I love the story, and I like to make a tribute car." And I told him, "Sure." Just like that. And that's how that conversation went. and then fast forward, and later, now we have the tribute car.
So I'm guessing that the first time you saw the modern Last Call Black Ghost Edition, like everyone else, was at SEMA, correct? Is that the first time you got to see it in the flesh?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Dodge is doing 300 units of these Black Ghost Last Call Editions specifically as a tribute to your dad's car. All of them will be painted in pitch black. They're going to be based on the Red Eye with 807 horsepower. Several specific call-outs on them directly tied to your dad's car. They've got the blacked out hood pins. They've got the Dodge lettering across the front. Just what an awesome modern tribute. So what was your experience when you saw this modern iteration in person?
Oh, yeah. So we were walking to the Dodge booth, and when we arrived at SEMA, it says, "Let's go by Dodge and see what they had." I had no idea it was going to be there. And then my son was like, "Wait a minute. Is that the Ghost? Is that the Ghost?" So we looked at it, and he was like, "Wow." So we were like shocked, and it's like, "Oh, wow." For a second, we didn't believe it. And I was like, "Wait a minute, it is." And, yeah, Dodge did a wonderful job on the car. I really like it. I really do. It's a very good modern version of the original, and I think they did an excellent job with it. Thanks, Dodge.
So the news has gone out far and wide that the car story has a new chapter in that it is headed to Dana Mecum's 36th original Spring Classic in Indianapolis, Indiana this May. And the time here in Florida has been made even more special by the fact that your family's car is on display with one of the very first 2023 Last Call Black Ghost Edition Challengers. It's one of the first opportunities for enthusiasts to see these cars together. I know a lot has happened, and there's been a lot for you and your family to take in, Gregory. And I'm just curious, what's the experience been like so far for you?
Yeah, it's been exciting, and it's been overwhelming, and it's been amazing, and it's been a lot of things. It's like I have a lot of mixed emotions. Because one side of me is like, I'm sad in a way, and then I'm not sad in a way. It's kind of hard to explain.
When you think back to the years you had with your dad, any special memories come to mind, either with or without the car?
Yeah, I had a lot of memories with my dad. My dad he is my hero. He really is. And we always had a good relationship with my father. And he would be fine. He'll be fine. And I think he's up there smiling down, even though some people may, beg to differ, but
Right.
I have to do what's best for my family.
Sure. Now, you mentioned earlier that your dad was the guy, you said he loved speed, he'd be out on his motorcycle. How else would you describe how your father was?
He was a caring man, gentle, wise, compassionate, fair, honest. He was just a really good guy to know. I wish people could really meet who he really was, because he was a really great guy. I mean, really, he'd take his shirt off his back and give it to you if you needed it. Whatever you need, he would have gave it to you.
Something that we mentioned earlier, and it's a big part of your dad's story, is his military career. Break down for me, what were the years that he served?
In 1964 to 66 is when he got drafted in the Vietnam War with the Dominican Republic. And he got a Purple Heart from a grenade blast that went off, and he had fragmentation in his body from the grenade. And then from there, he came out of the military and did some odd-end jobs for a minute, and then applied for the Detroit Police Department in 70. And then in April of 70, he got hired in, and he worked that job. And then in 77, he went to the National Guard, re-enlisted into the National Guard, and got his training and got his Green Beret and did that as reserve. So that's how he's able to do the police job, and then he was a reservist.
Now, Gregory, I know that you and your story is being shared, certainly here at Mecum. You have your family with you, and then also I know you have 3 generations. I know your son has particularly shown an interest in certainly being a part of this, and kind of I get the sense that you're able to kind of pass on a little bit about his grandfather, as well as kind of your love for cars and your dad's love of cars. Is that kind of the family dynamic?
Yeah, so Gregory had a chance to he had a good time with his grandfather. He does remember his grandfather and the things they did together that they shared, and they had a great time.
One of the things that you have done during this journey of documenting the car, its travels, your dad's legacy, is you create a website. What's the URL and what type of content do you have posted there?
Okay, so the URL is blackghost426.com or theblackghost.com. That's whatever is easier. I created the website because I wanted people to learn about the car, the people that couldn't see the car in person, because I can't be everywhere with the car. As much as people wants to see the car, if somebody asked me to take the car to the show, I would take it to the show, because I wanted the people to learn my dad's legacy and his story. And I want people to understand who he was and what the car was about. I wanted to share that because that was important to me for my dad, because he didn't get a chance to do that.
Well, Gregory, you have done an amazing job of getting the car out there and celebrating your dad's legacy and the stories associated with this car. And to think they all take place right in the heart of the Motor City. And I know the journey has been exciting thus far, and I'm sure it's only going to get more exciting as we get closer to May. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad people can hear the story.
You've been listening to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. For more information, visit Mecum.com. And join us again next time as we take you inside the world of muscle and collector cars and more.